Welcome to the Future of Diversity, a guest chef program for emerging and professional chefs to showcase their talents and passions at Osteria la Spiga. My name is Chef Sabrina Tinsley, and I'm the executive chef and co-owner of Osteria la Spiga. And with me this evening is Chef Tiffany Ran of Babalio.
Hi.
Hi. Babalio is a pop-up focused on showcasing Taiwanese flavors. Tiffany Ran is a Taiwanese American chef who has worked in Seattle restaurant kitchens for over a decade. She founded Babalio Taiwanese pop-up in 2018 after years of feeling homesick and unable to find many of the dishes she missed from home. She'll be putting this dinner together in collaboration with Chef Johnny Fellon, who she met while working at Brothers & Co. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thanks for being our first chef of the year and kicking off this amazing lineup of chefs. And yes, we're so excited to have you and so excited. Looking forward to our dinner this coming Monday, which you put together with Chef Johnny Fellon, as mentioned. And you'll be treating viewers to a delightful 5-course dinner. And I know that a lot of thought went into the development of the menu. And I'm so curious about the collaboration and the creative process behind this dinner. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. Johnny and I have worked together for a very long time, not just at Brothers & Co., but also he's helped me out through a lot of my pop-ups. So I guess folks who have come to the Fair Isle pop-ups that I've been doing over the past year, they probably have bumped into Johnny as well. So he's a big part of this pop-up that I guess a lot of people might not know about. And he deserves a lot of credit for how a lot of the dishes turn out. He just chooses to not take it sometimes. But throughout our time working together, we would always have these conversations just over, I don't know, over peeling potatoes or washing produce or something. You get bored and you start talking. And we just started realizing a lot of overlap between Taiwanese and Italian ways of preparing and treating food. So some of that is the sort of reverence for living off the land, eating farm fresh food, celebrating micro seasons for produce that maybe have like only a 2 weeks worth of season and then it's gone. So I don't know, I think like part of that discussion is like a lot of the greens that you can forage in the mountains in Taiwan. A lot of those seasons are pretty short. So you're eating a lot of it when it's available. And once it's gone, you won't see it till next year. And in Italy, I feel like fava beans are one of those things. And so they also do things like that for fava beans. And you'll be eating fava beans in everything for like 2 weeks, you know? And we also live with the ocean all around us. So that love for seafood and the way that we preserve and treat fish is also very similar. So this is just kind of stuff I feel like chefs get really nerdy and we start talking about these things. And at one point we casually threw out like, you know, all this stuff should just be a menu. We should just make a menu. Let's just open a restaurant and we joke about it. And it wasn't ever anything we got too serious over until you very kindly opened up your space to us. And it just felt very, like it was sort of meant to be, you know, like when do we ever have access to a beautiful Italian restaurant where we can actually execute a menu like this? So we're both so excited about it. Yeah.
Well, it sounds great. I can't wait to sample everything, to taste everything. So can you describe a couple of the dishes and
Definitely.
just kind of illustrate your point?
Yeah. So one of the big overlaps in like luxury ingredients that we have in Italy and in Taiwan is batarga. In Taiwan, it's mullet roe. In Italy, is it also mullet roe?
It is in Sardinia, yes. Mullet roe, otherwise it's tuna in Sicily.
Yeah. And so when I introduced our batarga to Johnny, we were discussing sort of how it's very similar, but also how it's different. In Taiwan, the mullet roe is pressed between rocks, so it becomes like a flatter shape. and then they sun dry it in low sun and high wind climates. So usually by the beach during like the autumn. And by winter, kind of towards the end of winter, when Lunar New Year rolls around, is usually when our batarga is ready for consumption. And so that's how this prized ingredient sort of became like a customary Lunar New Year dish in Taiwan. And then in Italy, you know, the batarga is a little drier. So I've seen in Italy that they're grating batarga over pasta. And then in our case, we would use this dry batarga that's still sort of like soft and fudgy on the inside. And we would slice it. We would toast it up and slice it and eat it with raw leeks or even raw apples. It's just like a nice little bite, like almost like an amuse-bouche or like a appetizer of sorts. Yeah. So that's an ingredient I'm very excited about. I have a limited supply here that I smuggled back from Taiwan. And that's going to be made available for this dinner. We're going to have a chicory salad that's going to be like the late season chicory that we may have to bulk up with some spring greens because we're in a transitional season right now. So we're going to have a beautiful chicory salad with these batarga that is that we're going to make with like as little squares. So they're going to be toasted and turned into batarga croutons. And that'll sit on like a very beautiful black garlic dressing. So that's a very beautiful, colorful, exciting dish on the menu. We also have a rapini dish that's going to have like a combination of capers and something in Taiwan we call huobuzi, or also known as like pickled Cordia dichotoma.
What is that?
The common name is like black tree lime or something, but in any case, it's just this little berry that grows on a tree, and we preserve it very similar to how in Italy they preserve olives. And it has a little bit of a similar texture and flavor to olives too. We usually have soy sauce in our pickle brine, so it's a little more soy forward, a little bit savory, sweet, and sour. So we decided to sort of work our Taiwanese olives of sorts in with some capers, and that's going to go with our grilled rapini dish. We'll grate some preserved egg yolk over it as well. And then something that I thought was so tongue-in-cheek and really funny is our dumpling style agnolotti. And Johnny really wanted to do a pasta dish. Everyone knows the crossovers between dumplings within every culture in the world. So we just decided to sort of merge our dumplings and his agnolotti and kind of make like an agnolotti dish out of it. But the farce is going to be a traditional dumpling filling that you would typically have in like a Taiwanese dumpling. And that one's really exciting because that'll also incorporate chrysanthemum greens and pork and leeks and just really delicious flavors that will sort of remind you of like a wonton soup, but in an Italian way.
Well, you've got my mouth watering for sure.
Yeah.
I know it was really important for you to source your ingredients locally from local farmers. Why is this so important?
I think I've just been lucky enough to work in restaurants that have always had this practice. And what I realized what's so important about this practice isn't necessarily to be able to say on a menu that you're a farm to table restaurant, but that experience of being a farm to table restaurant is something I think most people don't understand. Like when you're a farm to table restaurant, you have a direct relationship with these farmers. So whatever affects them affects you. And that might sound negative, but I don't feel like it is, because it automatically sort of works you into their ecosystem. So in the same way that they're affected by climate, by the earth, by weather, by anything, we are also affected, and our menu is forced to change because they've had to change whatever, you know, setup they had originally planned. And I like that. I like that feeling that even though the restaurant is a business, it can be part of a greater community of people. And you look forward to seeing these farmers come through your door every couple days just to show you what they've been working on. A lot of that is such like a more nourishing way of doing business that isn't so insular, you know. I think a lot of times the old fashioned restaurant styles, like you're just in a sterile environment with no windows. You have no idea what the weather is on the outside. And you're stuck there for 10 hours a day. And you really don't see or talk to very many people. And you're not thinking that much about where you live, the earth that you inhabit. You know, you're not thinking about those things. And being truly farm to table, kind of like sourcing locally from farmers, really is just about branching out and being part of a community, you know?
I love that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Very well put. I know that you have an opportunity to visit Taiwan quite frequently. You go back every year. And before the pandemic, you were going back multiple times a year, it sounds
I
like.
try anyway. It's not
Wow.
easy.
That's exciting. So tell us about your journeys and some of the most intriguing things that you've discovered while you were in Taiwan.
Yeah, I think in Taiwan, I would always discover something new because there's aspects of Taiwan that I think are very under the surface. Like we're starting to have more tourism there. And then what gets promoted on a tourism level is kind of the dishes that everyone readily gets excited about. So they love our bento boxes and they love like our beef noodle soup. And these dishes are starting to sort of make it into the mainstream where everyone can kind of liken Taiwan with some signature dishes like scallion pancakes or like xiaolongbao is another one. So there's that, but every time I go back and I dig a little deeper, I can always find something new. And that's because Taiwan is just occupied by so many groups. I think even as Taiwanese Americans, we don't often see that because our own families might just only be from one group out of the many that occupy Taiwan. So my family, for example, we have like mainland Chinese heritage. So growing up, I only saw one facet of Taiwan most of the time, even in terms of food. It tended to be more Chinese, Taiwanese food and less of like the other cuisines that are available, like Hakka cuisine, for example, is very well represented in Taiwan. A lot of like the Fujian influence that the traditional Taiwanese fishermen had brought over. I didn't really know a lot of those things or didn't really grow up with that. There's also a lot of indigenous groups in Taiwan that make their mark and have tended the land and foraged the mountains or fished, you know, the local seas. And, you know, they have a lot of contribution to the cuisine that is also very new for me too. So I'm never short of new discoveries when I go back there.
And you have quite a following on Instagram of Taiwanese Americans, and it's really important for you that they feel supported. And I remember you mentioning one of the ways that you like to support the local community is by bringing back some lesser known recipes and showcasing these unique recipes. And how do you think that makes or supports the local community?
Yeah, I mean, I feel this as a Taiwanese American too, is that when you're disconnected from your homeland and you're growing up in another country, you lose a lot of heritage and you're not thinking about that a lot of times, but it's definitely more pervasive for Taiwanese people because we're just, our communities tend to not be so large. And while the Taiwanese American community in Seattle, in the Seattle Bellevue area is growing over the years, it's not as large compared to, you know, other parts of the US. And the representation of our cuisine is still very shallow. So when I first moved to Seattle from Los Angeles, there was a big difference in the Taiwanese American population. And I was seeing a lot of confusion among Taiwanese Americans on what makes Taiwanese food Taiwanese. And it's very hard to explain because we have so many influences in our cuisine to say any one thing is quintessentially Taiwanese or that it's not. So for a lot of them, growing up in the Seattle area, they're going to have attachments to say like Cantonese food or a dish that's more quintessentially Cantonese or from the Guangdong region of China. And that's not wrong. That's not necessarily an error in any way, but it just was what was available to them that allowed them to sort of connect with a sense of like home, you know. But I think just because of that, the sort of lack of access to Taiwan and some of the older dishes that say like grandmas would prepare, or some of the older dishes that only the street vendors from kind of more rural areas in Taiwan would prepare, you lose connection to those things, you lose knowledge of it as well. And you sort of have to just relate to Taiwan in a sort of disconnected way, like through a Cantonese restaurant in the ID, for example, you know? And if that's the best thing that you got, if that's the closest thing you got, I think that's so powerful and that's amazing. But I want to keep improving upon that. So what really means a lot to me is if someone's like, I haven't had this since my grandma made it. Like, I don't even think my mom knows how to make this thing, you know, how did you know about this? And like, that means so much to me because a lot of these dishes are sort of becoming more obscure, even in Taiwan, you know? So it's just important to me to keep a lot of that alive.
Sounds like an exciting, unending journey. Like there's
Yeah.
there's still so much to discover. So that's
It's a lot of like talking to old aunties in the markets and stuff like that. And I think they must think I'm really weird because, you know, I'm definitely not young by any means, but I'm probably the youngest person there who seems to care about these things. And they're like, oh, young people don't eat that anymore. Like, you won't like this. You won't be interested. And I'm like, no, I am very interested. Please tell me.
yes. Wow. Well, that's me in Italy, so I can totally relate.
Yeah,
I can totally
exactly.
relate. You mentioned at some point you'd like to set up a stage in a high-end restaurant in
Mhm.
Taiwan
Yeah.
in kind of, I don't know, describe or talk to us a little bit about why you would like to do that and what you're hoping to gain from that.
Yeah, this is more of a personal goal of mine. I guess it will of course benefit the pop-up or anything I work on in the future, but you know, I was a caregiver for my father for 10 years before he passed, and that was pretty all-consuming. So even though I was cooking and working in restaurants during that time, it was very hard to have a continuity of, you know, my career. There would definitely be moments if his health went downhill that I would have to put a pause on my progress and sort of drop everything to assist him. So it's just something that kind of coming along in the industry over the years, I've seen a lot of cooks and chefs really just be able to step it up after going through a couple of stages in like other restaurants like these. And it's something that's always been on my list of what I wanted to do. But as a caregiver, I kind of knew it just wasn't very feasible to go to another country for a long period of time and work in this intense environment, you know? And I guess like now that my father has passed and I have this opportunity to kind of focus on myself, it's something I want to check off the list before I get too old to keep up. So we'll see where that leads me.
Great. So you talk about your father. So
Yeah.
you grew up in Los Angeles
Hmm.
as an only child in a single household with your father
Right.
as your parent figure.
Yeah.
Um, and you talk about how you were always hungry growing up.
Hmm.
And I'm curious to know how you remedied that situation and how it has affected how that experience has affected your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think there's so much to unpack there, and it's like how it's affected my life probably in so many ways that more than I could explain. But I think that it was very prominent to me entering the industry that a lot of chefs have that story, sort of the ratatouille story where your grandmother's making pasta with you and you're like standing on a stool kneading dough with her, or you're licking the beaters after your mom had baked a cake or something. And I just didn't grow up with that. I don't think I don't think of it as a loss as much as I think that it just shaped me a little differently because I learned to be more resourceful with food, or to enjoy food that maybe other people wouldn't find as enjoyable. Like I think like my dad tried his best, but uh it didn't really help sometimes. Like sometimes I was just still very hungry and he only had a certain capacity, but he would still try to say make soup with pork bones. And um I would find kind of gnawing the little cartilagey bits off the pork bones after the soup is done to be so satisfying. So like I've always known I enjoyed food, and maybe the things I enjoyed growing up was a little more unconventional because it's like gnawing at a bone or something, right? And that wasn't tragic by any means. I feel like it opened up different ways of experiencing food, and I found different things about food that I could enjoy. But it also meant that if I was able to try any new dish or new flavor for the first time, I was almost always hungry. So those things would stick. And I can still think back to a lot of the things I've tried for the first time and remember that exact moment and how everything tasted to me. And all of those memories are like pretty stuck in there. And who knows, like maybe if I was a very well-fed kid, I think those memories wouldn't mean as much.
Your career in the kitchen happened somewhat serendipitously. Is that a word?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because in your former career, you were a food writer, and actually you still do some writing,
A
don't
little
you?
bit. I try. Yeah. I try to
Yeah,
joke a little.
right. So you just kind of you were looking for a story,
Mhm.
and something else happened besides the story. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened and how that
Yeah. I was working in the offices of this publication called Yes Magazine on Bainbridge Island, and I had always wanted to be a food writer or to transition more into writing about food, but then just sort of felt like I didn't have access or didn't understand restaurants as much as I should have for someone who wants to write about food. And as luck would have it, this small restaurant was opening up on Winslow Way and Bainbridge Island. And I walked into this restaurant, and the chef's mom was still putting up curtains, and like I feel like I remember the chef himself like painting the restaurant. It just had this real mom and pop kind of vibe. And I was so lucky to have walked into that restaurant. And that restaurant was Hitchcock Restaurant, which later became Hitchcock Restaurant, Hitchcock Deli. There's a Hitchcock Cafe in downtown Seattle. They now have Barcelea next door, and and eventually like Hitchcock became Seabird. But I walked in at this time when Chef Brendan McGill was still sort of like building up the beginnings of what would be this amazing restaurant group. And that was really my first foray into understanding how restaurants work. Um, And I would go in every day with like a pen and a notepad, trying to take notes and just observing. And I didn't know what the story would be. I just wanted to learn about restaurants, you know. I think what ultimately happened was I got sucked in. Like, I entered the dark side, you know. I don't know when the moment exactly was, but there's just this sense of like, even though I couldn't necessarily cook or do anything, um, if they were in the weeds or if something was going down, I at some point just dropped the pen and paper and was like, what can I do for you? Like, run to the walk-in and grab parsley. Okay, done. I know what parsley is. I can go do that. And I just started sort of like putting my hands on the food more than I was taking notes. And I felt like something in my whole body and my mind and spiritually, like something shifted. And I felt like this was where I was supposed to go.
I love that story.
Yeah. And I probably hung around that restaurant for like a good 2 or 2.5 years. Eventually staging there, but initially when it happened, I didn't even know this term like stagiaire, you know, like I had no idea what that meant. I didn't even know I was supposed to ask for a stage necessarily, you know. So it all sort of just snowballed from that moment.
And after that, you went on to work for some top chefs all over Seattle. How did you decide where you wanted to go next?
I think a lot of that was pretty organic too. I think it's why it's so important when I talk to newer chefs I tell them to like do their research, you know, follow chefs on Instagram, pay attention to how they're representing themselves, what story they're trying to tell or what they're trying to accomplish. Because if something that in the story they're telling resonates with you, then maybe that's a chef that you need to pay attention to and a chef that you might want to consider working for in the future. So, you know, I was lucky in the sense that I walked into the most perfect place. I could have walked into a lesser known restaurant or just a less fulfilling restaurant or even a more toxic restaurant, and my career would have ended up very differently. But through Brendan, I met the other chefs that he came up in the industry with. And, you know, while Brendan was opening restaurants, they were also embarking on their journey of opening restaurants. And so, you know, and they had friends who were also becoming chefs of restaurants. So from one chef, you meet others and you just go start kind of building your network that way. And I was very lucky that this happened organically, but I would recommend for anyone sort of entering the industry to really have an idea of what your values are. And then find other chefs who share those values.
That's some great advice for new chefs coming up. Do you ever do any mentoring?
No, not officially. I don't think so. I'm not close to the idea. I just have no idea how that would start.
Well, you'd be great at it. Well, that's awesome. Well, this has been wonderful. I guess before we sign off, because we've been talking for about 30 minutes now, or just over 30 minutes. So wow, that time went by fast. But is there any, can you share your Instagram with us for starters? And then tell us a little bit about how people can find you and your pop-ups and follow you.
Yeah, so Instagram is where we're most active, and our handle is at BB6TW Popup. And then we'll also be, you know, sharing some stuff through our website, but Instagram's kind of where everyone will be able to receive the news first of future dinners that we'll be doing. We're signed on to do a Fair Isle dinner in April, and then our summer schedule is going to fill up pretty soon. So we'll be keeping everyone posted on that.
That's wonderful. Well, I look forward to visiting one of your pop-ups soon, and
Please.
especially look forward to the dinner on Monday. I guess I'm going to be a guest,
Yes.
and sitting down and enjoying the menu. And I so look forward to it. And I know that our viewers are in for a wonderful treat.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to cook for you, I won't lie.
No, I'm a very gracious guest. Plus, I've already eaten your food and on past occasions, and it's delicious.
Thank
So
you so much.
yeah. Oh, well, thank you. And again, we look forward to Monday, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, yeah. I encourage everyone, if they haven't yet, to buy tickets because we would just love to see you all there. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Agreed.
you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye.